Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche and why you should read it if you haven't already. This book was published in 1886. My version, the Penguin's classic version, runs approximately 240 pages long, but it depends on your edition. And Nietzsche, and Beyond Good and Evil in particular, but Nietzsche is one of those philosophers that you have to engage with if you want to engage with philosophy seriously and on a deep level. It's great to read Marcus Aurelius, it's great to read the Stoic philosophers, but they can be easy at times and a tad bit shallow. If you really want to get into philosophy, you got to engage with difficult thinkers like Nietzsche. Now, maybe it's better to branch off into Plato or Aristotle first, but I love Nietzsche. I think he's a philosopher for everybody. He's not too difficult that I can't recommend this book to kind of the average person if they're interested, obviously. And he's not too easy to where it's kind of like reading Meditations, where it's a bit of a breeze to work through. You'll have to grapple with this book at times, and even though it's a short book, it should take you a while to work through. Now, Nietzsche writes in aphorisms, which is a great way to kind of break apart his dense philosophy. Sometimes you have philosophical thinkers like Kant, Heidegger, Hegel, Schopenhauer. They're very, very dense, thick works that can take years to work through. Whereas Nietzsche breaks things up into aphorisms. So an aphorism is a concentrated sentence, or sometimes a paragraph, or sometimes, in Nietzsche's case, multiple paragraphs, but it's concentrated thought. And you could take each one apart and wrestle with it for days, months, years, decades. Like some of Nietzsche's quotes I'm going to be wrestling with for the rest of my life. And I'll give you guys my favorite quote from this book at the very end of the video, but I find that breaking things up into those aphorisms makes things quite easy, and a lot of them are very short. Like you can see here, there are a lot of very, very short ones, and I don't annotate my books because I like to keep my books in pristine condition, but I do have a separate notebook where I write down all of my favorite quotes, and quite a few of my favorite quotes are from Nietzsche, and a few of them are from this book. So what I'm going to do for you guys today is I'm going to read for you guys a summary of what this book actually covers. Hopefully it's engaging and it gets you guys to go out there and pick this up for yourself and read it. Then I'll give you guys a list of philosophical works that I would branch off to after this. I'll give you guys a few films that I think are Nietzschean in quality. I'll give you guys a couple documentaries if you guys want to get deeper into Nietzsche's life. And yeah, before we get into all of that, though, I got to give you guys a couple words on the author himself. Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher, cultural critic, and philologist born in 1844. Known for his ferocious intellect and poetic style, Nietzsche's works confront the foundations of morality, religion, culture, and truth, often dismantling them with razor-sharp wit and insight. Though plagued by illness and dismissed in his own time, his influence has since permeated every field in the humanities, from psychology and theology to literature and the arts. To read Nietzsche is to step into the storm of a mind that dared to challenge all certainties, inviting readers to confront the abyss of meaning and emerge, perhaps reborn. So yeah, Nietzsche is one of the most individual, in fact, I would say that he's probably the most individual thinker and philosopher I've ever come across, and like I noted there, his life was plagued by illness, physical and mental. He spent the last 11 years of his life in severe mental and physical decline, which is one of the reasons why he actually wrote in aphorisms. It was difficult for him to sit down and write and concentrate like that, so he would go on walks when he could, or sit down and just think and ponder, and he would let his mind kind of pull all of the ideas together, and then with a hammer, he would philosophize them down into these aphorisms, and that's why his philosophy is so dense and so powerful. So here are a couple words on this work itself, Beyond Good and Evil. Beyond Good and Evil is Nietzsche's fearless philosophical crucible, a work that scorches through the comfortable assumptions of traditional morality and dares readers to reckon with the raw will that shapes truth, value, and human existence. Through aphorisms, both profound and piercing, Nietzsche offers not a systematic doctrine, but a symphony of provocations unmasking the self-deceptions of philosophers, criticizing herd-like obedience to dogma, and revealing the deeper instincts that drive belief and behavior. At once poetic and polemical, the book reads like a manifesto whispered by firelight, its tone intimate yet explosive. Here, Nietzsche dismantles the illusions of objectivity and virtue, proposing instead a radical revaluation of values and the pursuit of intellectual honesty as a higher virtue. It is an uncompromising invitation to think dangerously, live courageously, and stand on the precipice of truth without flinching. So yeah, I hope that summary pushes you guys to go and pick up this work for yourself. This book is very cheap. The Penguin Classics edition is I think like $15 Canadian. Or if you guys prefer audiobooks and listening to your books, there is a free version of this audiobook on YouTube. It's not too long, so you guys can work through it in maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month. Like I said, take your time with Nietzsche. You know, pause here and there, think about what he's saying, write things down, write down what you think about what he's proposing, and yeah, take your time to work through it because it's a profound work. An interesting fact about Beyond Good and Evil is that it's dedicated to his friend and former lover, Lou Andreas Salamone, a brilliant Russian-born intellectual who profoundly influenced his thought. I'll now list for you guys on screen all of Nietzsche's works. You guys can go out and find these works on your own. Like I've said before, I have already created a reading guide to Nietzsche where I go through basically all the works you see on screen now. I might have missed a few in that video, but I went through all of his major works and I kind of laid out for you guys in which order would I read them if it was my first time engaging with Nietzsche. Beyond Good and Evil, I can't remember explicitly, I apologize, but I'm sure it was somewhere towards the beginning. It might not have been the first book that I talked about, but again, if you guys want kind of an expansive video where I link each work of Nietzsche to a work of Dostoevsky, I do think that that could be a useful video for you guys. But next, I want to list for you guys some films that I think are very Nietzschean and would pair well with a reading of Beyond Good and Evil. So there's a famous quote from Carl Jung that goes something like this: Dostoevsky is the only psychologist of whom I have anything to learn from. That's a very powerful quote, but I think it speaks to how psychologically deep and brilliant the writings of Dostoevsky were. Now, I could say a similar statement, not completely, because I don't think that there's anyone in the history of film that quite elevates themselves above the rest, quite like Dostoevsky did in terms of writing. But if I had to make a pick and I had to say there's only one filmmaker of whom I can learn anything from when it comes to psychology, I think it would be Bergman. I think it would be Ingmar Bergman. I think he's probably the deepest psychological film director I've ever come across. And that's saying a lot because I love Lynch. I love Tarkovsky. I probably love their films even more than Bergman's films, but Bergman goes deeper than anybody I've ever come across. Now, you could argue all day that maybe Kurosawa has deeper philosophical films, or Ozu, or whoever it might be, but for me it's Bergman, and for me there's one film that I think stands out above the rest as the film that I would pick to get people into watching Ingmar Bergman films, and that would be The Seventh Seal. A lot of people have seen shots from this film because it has some of the most iconic cinematography of all time, but I think that this film, if you take your time and watch it, and again, it's a black and white film that's in Swedish, so I know that that's a turnoff for some people, but if you take your time to watch it, you'll find that Ingmar Bergman is one of the deepest philosophical writers I've ever come across in terms of film. And if you want somebody that's very Nietzschean when it comes to how he approaches philosophy, I think Bergman is the definitive example of that. Again, it's hard to say just one person, like Jung said about Dostoevsky, but Bergman's very close, if not at the very top of my list. So next up, we have a film that is one of my favorite films of all time. It's one of the most essential films for every man to watch, and I'm sure many of you have already seen it. It's a film that I want to do a film analysis for on my channel eventually, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until I can do this channel full time, or at least I can dedicate more time to the channel, because I want to do it well, and I want to pull it apart in a deeper way than anybody ever has before. And that film is, of course, Fight Club. Fight Club is a very deep psychological film, and I think there's a lot of Nietzschean elements throughout it. So if you haven't watched Fight Club in a long time, go back and rewatch it. Nothing will beat the first time you watch it. If you're watching this video and you've never seen Fight Club before, I envy you. It's one of the top 10, probably top 5, it might even be the top 1 film that I would really love to rewatch for the first time. Because, man, the way that film twists and turns and the way it ends is just so powerful. And if you haven't watched it for a long time, definitely go back and rewatch it. It gets better every time you watch it. The first time I watched Fight Club, I was blown away. The second time I watched it, I was like, this is a lot deeper than I thought. The third time I watched it, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know what this film was the first 2 times I watched it. It's a different film now, and every time I watch it, it's a different film to me. The next film that I'm going to mention today is another psychological masterpiece, and it's, of course, Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. Maybe his deepest psychological film. It's hard to say because I can make very strong arguments for The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey, and probably Full Metal Jacket, and also probably Eyes Wide Shut. He's just one of the greatest film directors of all time. We all know that, but A Clockwork Orange is one of those films that really dives into expressing free will and how morality plays into that. And it's a deep book too. It's a very short book. You can read it in just a couple days. It's only, I think, maybe 200 pages long, and I highly recommend both the book and the film. So A Clockwork Orange is a film that I would definitely recommend. The fourth film that I would recommend is definitely underrated, and I think everybody should watch this film. If you're watching this video, I can almost guarantee that you will find this film interesting, and it's called The Sunset Limited. It came out in 2011, and it stars basically just 2 actors. There's other people in the film, like extras and stuff, but it's just a film between 2 actors in a room having a philosophical conversation for like 2 hours, and it's Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson. So it doesn't get much better than that. And it's a very deep film, very well written. I believe it's based off of a play. I might have seen bits of the play from like a YouTube version of it, but I've never seen that play in person, and I would like to someday because I'm very captivated by the story. I thought the film was fantastic, and from what I've heard from people, if you see a play version of it, it's even better. But I think The Sunset Limited is a very deep film. It's obviously incredibly dialogue heavy. It's a bubble film or a bottle film. It takes place in one location, and it's basically just what is it? I think it's an hour and 45 minutes, the film. It's a hour and 3/4 long philosophical conversation that I think is incredibly engaging. So the last film that I'll mention today is Richard Linklater, one of my favorite directors of all time, very underrated director, and one of the best writers when it comes to dialogue. His film, Waking Life, I highly recommend. It's a film that I've fallen asleep to many times because it's a very dreamlike film. The animation's very woozy and abstract and kind of takes you all over the place, and things morph into other things. It feels very dreamlike, and the whole film is like just a series of different philosophical conversations kind of stitched together. It's a very unique film, very, very unique piece of filmmaking. I highly recommend checking it out, and I highly recommend checking out all of Richard Linklater's films. His Before, or his Sunset trilogy. Is it Sunset, Before Sunset, After Sunset, is it Midnight? I can't remember the names of all the films, but the trilogy with Ethan Hawke and the other actress that I'm also forgetting, that's one of my favorite romance trilogies of all time, and I think it's brilliantly written. So those are just 5 films that I would recommend that are very Nietzschean, but I could make you guys an entire list of 100 films that I think are Nietzschean, and maybe I'll do that eventually. We'll see. Maybe I'll make a video, something like that on my channel. Maybe I won't do 100 films. Maybe we'll do 25 or 50 to start, but there are a lot of films out there that I think represent or reflect Nietzsche's ideas, and some of them more explicitly than others. I think Ingmar Bergman, we can say, was like definitely directly influenced by Nietzsche. You can see a lot of his themes throughout his films, throughout Bergman's films, and he's just one of those directors like Ozu or like Tarkovsky, or Kurosawa was a little bit more accessible, but some of these directors that have like multiple masterpieces, I would say Bergman probably has at least 10, maybe 11 masterpieces that I would say like are on the level of 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Matrix, like these 10 out of 10 films that you have in your head. I would say he has 11 of those. And a lot of people don't engage with his works because they're, black and white, in Swedish, a little bit abstract, sometimes slow. But I think if you take the time and you have the patience to engage with Bergman, you'll find that he is truly one of the deepest psychological and philosophical directors that has ever touched a movie camera. So let's move on to 3 documentaries that I would recommend to pair with Beyond Good and Evil. The first documentary is Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil from 2001. It's a biographical documentary on Nietzsche's life and his influence. I highly recommend that one if you want to get a little bit deeper into the life of Nietzsche. Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche from 1999 is a BBC documentary, and it's a deep dive into Nietzsche's ideas and his relationships. Also highly recommend that one as well. And lastly, lastly, I'll recommend The Examined Life from 2008, a great documentary that kind of discussed not just Nietzsche, but a bunch of philosophers and kind of how their thoughts intertwine. And yeah, The Examined Life is just one of the greatest philosophy documentaries I've ever watched. So I highly recommend that one as well. So yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to share with you guys today. Unfortunately, I don't have any paintings. Nietzsche wasn't really a painter. He has a couple drawings and doodles and stuff like that you can go check out, but not really any music to share either. I don't really know if there's any Nietzschean music out there. If you guys have any suggestions, you guys can let me know down below in the comments, but that's all that I wanted to share with you guys today. But I'll conclude with sharing with you guys my favorite quote from this book, and that is, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby becomes a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." So that quote from Nietzsche is one of the most powerful quotes I've ever read from him, and it's helped me out a lot in my life. You can tell from this shelf here and from some of my other shelves, if you've seen my library tour video, that I battle with monsters. I fight them, and I do gaze into the abyss quite often. I think about evil and death just about every single day. And this is not a brag in the slightest, because I don't recommend this for anybody, but I've literally seen hundreds, if not thousands, of videos of people dying in the most horrific fashion. Your brain can't even imagine it. Until you see it, you can't even imagine what some human beings can do to other human beings. And I oftentimes come back to this quote and think about, if you gaze into the abyss long enough, the abyss gazes back at you. And that has been a lighthouse that has brought me back to the light many times, because just reading the Gulag Archipelago or reading the tapes from the Toy Box Killer, there have been things, or the writings of the Marquis de Sade, Juliet and Justine and Juliet, reading those works have scarred me and have imprinted images. I say it all the time, it sears images on your skull that you just can't get rid of. And those experiences have made me a stronger person, and it's helped me to recognize not just evil in others, but evil in myself. And those experiences, I'm called to them, so there's not much I can do about it. I just have some sort of sick, morbid curiosity where I dive into the worst of the worst. But this quote from Nietzsche does help me a lot. And I feel a connection to another thinker, even if it was 150 years ago, somebody else who thought the same things and was cursed or plagued by the same morbid curiosity that I have. I'm not saying that Nietzsche also watched thousands of death videos, but he also saw death in his own life, and he experienced some pretty horrible things himself. So it's nice to have somebody who's put that into such beautiful prose like that. That quote there that I just read for you guys, I have it written down in a journal. I have it written down on a piece of paper that I come back and I look at often, because, like I said, I spend a lot of time looking into the most evil people and staring into that abyss. So if I think about that all day, I can spiral out and lose my sanity a little bit. So I'll wrap the video up there for today. Nietzsche's a thinker that is very, very influential to myself. He's helped me out a lot, and I hope others pick up his works and read through them carefully and find some insights that help them as well. Because a thinker like this, there's no replacement for them. We're lucky to have somebody like this. We're almost not even worthy of it. And yeah, that's all that I'll say about Nietzsche today, because I could talk about him forever. So if you guys have any questions about this work, or if you guys have more questions of where you guys should go after this, more book recommendations, if you want more film recommendations, let me know down below in the comments, and I can certainly provide that for you guys. If you guys like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends to help boost this channel in the algorithm. Definitely let me know down below which book you want to see covered next on this series. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, it means the world to me. It truly does. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.